A potential recruiting battle between Ryan Day and Deion Sanders. That could be the reality as both coaches are going after KJ Bolden, who is one of the best football players in the 2024 recruiting class.
You are Locked On Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Buckeye fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Buckeyes for the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jay Stevens, also the host of the Jay Stevens Podcast. It is Thursday, January 4th in the year 2023, and I want to thank you for making Locked On Buckeyes your first listen or first watch of every single day. During this episode, we will be joined by John Garcia Jr. John is Locked On's football recruiting insider. John and I discuss what makes KJ Bolden one of the best recruits in the 2024 recruiting class. We also go over what makes Donavan Harbour one of the best offensive linemen in the country as well. John and I had plans to discuss another talented athlete on the defensive side of the ball, but that will have to wait until another day. Time constraints had to cut that portion out of the show. But we got Donavan Harbour, we got KJ Bolden, and when you hear more about them, I think you will want them to be Buckeyes, just like Ryan Day wants them to potentially play in Columbus in the future. And as we welcome in John Garcia Jr., I'd like to thank LinkedIn Jobs for being the official college football and college basketball recruiting sponsor across the Locked On College Network. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. We are back once again with a recruiting update with our guy, John Garcia Jr. Like I said previously earlier in the show, he is Locked On's football recruiting insider. And for this show, I teased last time we had John, it'd be about quarterbacks. Then I'm scrolling on the Twitter, and I see that Ohio State is in the midst of a top 5 or a top 7 for a few recruits. So we're going to talk about them today. But the first recruit we're going to talk about has a top 15. The Buckeyes are in the mix for KJ Bolden, 6'1", 185-pound, two-way player, John, DB, wide receiver. This man, when he's on the field, he can do it all.
Yeah, KJ Bolden he's kind of that guy in 2024. I think if you were ranking just the best football players, not prospects, but football players, he'd probably be the number one guy in the country. He could legitimately be an instant impact wide receiver or contribute to your secondary right out of the gates come, I guess, the fall of 24. So there's just not a lot of prospects we talk about in that light. The last one, I think, at the very high level was Travis Hunter, who is still anything he does generates its own headlines. And this kid, KJ's coming out of the same Atlanta area, Buford High School, which is really one of the marquee schools in the entire country, much less the state of Georgia. And whenever you're the top recruit in the state of Georgia, which I would think it's unanimous at this point for the 24 class that it is Bolden, it's a big deal. That state has become one of the 4 most talented states in the country, one of the 4 most recruited states in the country, and respected on that same light, along with, of course, Florida, Texas, and California. So it's a huge deal if you're even in the mix for KJ Bolden. Obviously, Ohio State is. And look, he could absolutely continue that receiver legacy, which you've already started in that class with Jeremiah Smith, who might be the number 1 receiver in the class overall, or he could kickstart your secondary haul one day for any school. So this is a truly elite prospect he just has juice. Put him in the safety spot. He's going to turn the football over. He's going to make physical hits. He's going to play the alley well. And he can absolutely turn and run with any receiver in the class. Put him on offense, and he's electric. He's going to take it 80 yards to the house. He'll factor into your return game. There's just a comfort with him instinctually and athletically with whatever you ask him to do. And he's got the size to do it, right? 6 foot, 185, as you mentioned. Imagine what that projects like in 2 years when he
Yeah.
gets to school X, so he could be a 6'2", 200-pound player the moment he arrives at the collegiate level. And that has value, obviously, on both sides of the ball in and of itself. So he's really a superstar recruit. He's been billed as that since, I would say, late middle school is when I first heard about him.
Oh,
And he
wow.
has continued to live up to it to this point, which isn't always the case. So there's a lot of stock. If you were placing some of that in high school recruits, there's a lot of stock already with KJ Bolden, but it's still somehow going up, which again is pretty rare on the recruiting front.
I mentioned earlier that Bolden released his top 15. In the mix is Ohio State, Georgia. He is from the state of Georgia, Alabama, Clemson. A lot of the notables, the ones you expect. Oregon's there, Ole Miss, Michigan, LSU, South Carolina, USC. There's Colorado, and I don't know if this is going to be the Travis Hunter effect, where Travis Hunter went to a FCS, HBCU to Dion. I don't know if that Dion effect, the two-way player, Dion was a two-way player of it, himself. So I don't know if that's going to follow with Bolden. Like, say, I'm not going to go to the in-state school. I'm going to go to Colorado. If Dion's still there, like, who knows where Dion is when Bolden decides to commit to play college football? Maybe Dion's like, hey, Colorado, great, but I want to go somewhere else and coach after 1 year. I'm spitballing here, but who knows where Dion goes. But Colorado's one where, John, I remember last year, well, into this cycle, there were a lot of guys that had Jackson State, and it stuck out to me because it's not normal. And to get Colorado in the mix of a guy who's one of the best in this class, it's crazy, but this is what's going to happen. People and young athletes are going to flock to Dion because Dion, he wins where he goes. He can develop you, and he can help you make money as well. So yes. I understand the Dion effect, but Colorado going after one of the top guys and being in the top 15, that's huge. Where I don't know if Ohio State's going to be in a recruiting battle with Colorado over the next few years. It can happen because of Deion Sanders.
Yeah, it'll overlap. I mean, this is something that every school is aware of at this point. Like you said, you used to see kids drop a top 5, and it's 4 Power 5 schools and Jackson State, and you're like, yeah. Oh, okay, are they really in it? And then as time goes on, you're like, yeah, they were really in it, and obviously they won some huge marquee battles. None bigger than Travis Hunter, as we mentioned. But imagine that stepping up to the Power 5 level, and that's exactly what's happened now with Dion in Colorado. And it's really this 24 class where we're going to really feel the impact there. Obviously, at the end of 23, he splashed. He flipped a couple recruits. He's still accumulating plenty of talent, and the portal has been great to him at Colorado. But in terms of high school recruiting, it's this class of 24 where we're going to measure, okay, Dion at the Power 5 level, what does it look like? This is the class where it's going to be, make or break. And I think he needs that marquee guy. I know he does. And obviously, when you're talking about marketing, you're talking about two-way playing, athleticism in the South. I mean, Deion Sanders checks all of those boxes. So, yeah, there's a scenario where if you're Ryan Day, if you're Nick Saban, if you're Dabo Swinney, if you're Steve Sarkisian, if you're Lincoln Riley, you're going to go head-to-head with Deion Sanders at Colorado, and you might fall on the wrong end of it. It's going to happen at some point. There's not a matter of is it possible? He's already done it. He got the number 1 player in the country to go to an HBCU at the FCS level. So the expectation is that the talent acquisition is going to continue under Deion. Now, whether or not Colorado can put together wins in a, by the way, very good and promising Pac-12,
yes,
looking
sir.
ahead to 23 with all those QBs coming back, that's the other question that he's got to answer. But look, from a recruiting standpoint, at a minimum, Colorado's going to stay in the mix here, and it's not something that should be overlooked, especially when you talk about DBs or two-way guys. And obviously, KJ checks both of those boxes on his own end. So, yeah, they're going to stay in a lot of these top groups, and they've already emerged in a lot of them early in this 24 class. So it is something that every, blue blood fan base should start to anticipate for sure.
One thing I do believe Ohio State, either they will, I don't know if they will, I think they need to go after players and improve the overall team speed at the skill positions. Now, I am not saying for those of you that watched the game against Georgia, Lathan Ransom slipped. I'm not saying like, plus he's not catching that cat anyway. I heard it's a 4-2 guy. Like he's not catching him in a race. But I do think the overall team speed at Ohio State defensively in the secondary needs to improve. I saw this young man, KJ Bolden, ran a 10.76 in the 100, 22.77 in the 200, then a 52.8 in the 4. Now, I don't know if those numbers have improved since what I have here that I got on the internet, but how do you think that would translate the 100? I know it's a little bit different, longer of distance, but say 100, do you know what his 40 time might be and how that speed how he utilizes that speed on the field?
Yeah, I don't have the numbers in front of me, Jay, but there's no issue from a speed standpoint with KJ, right? He's a guy who qualified for state finals races and sprinting races as a freshman in high school.
That's insane.
So there's no worry from a speed standpoint. And again, he's not a little guy. 6 foot, 6'1", 185 or so. There are a lot of examples on tape where he is gapping the competition and almost slowing down as he gets near the goal line on offense. So speed is absolutely not an issue. And again, depending on how big he gets, that's going to be interesting relative to his position projection, right? Mm-hmm. Do you throw him in as a big corner, which everybody wants, but it's hard to develop those guys. I did some research a year ago. There's only like 4 corners in the NFL, 6'2" or bigger. That's it in the NFL. So if he gets up to that size, even with great speed, can he develop into a true corner? Or is he a safety that you say, hey, roam the middle of the field and go make plays? I mean, maybe that's the case for him down the line. But either way, speed specifically, straight line speed, not going to be an issue wherever KJ Bolden ends up. He's got speed to burn for sure. And yeah, I do agree that's something that Ohio State can look to improve upon defensively. I think every school is looking to improve upon their team speed because the game continues to get wider, faster, and more space-based. So naturally, you need guys who can combat that on defense.
John, this top 15, I do anticipate at some point Bolden will go down to a top 10, maybe a top 7, top 8, maybe even top 3 from 15 to 3. I don't know, but I do think at some point he'll shorten this list. With the 15 schools that are here, where does Ohio State fit in the mix of this?
I think they're right in the thick of it, right near the top. Look, Georgia, Alabama, Clemson probably aren't going anywhere. Just regionally, nationally, those are the recruits that end up at those schools. So those are probably the safest 3 bets. Beyond that, I put Ohio State right at the top of the next tier. He's been to Columbus multiple times. He's already being recruited by current Ohio State commitments, including Jeremiah Smith, who we talked about earlier. That stuff matters when you're talking about elite players because those true alpha types want to play with other true alpha types. So I think that's going to keep the big blue blood schools at the very high end of this spectrum. So the top 15, yeah, it's big, it's broad, all of that. But again, if you started to quantify that and play the guessing game now, Ohio State is going to stay in this mix for quite a long time. We've seen them assimilate very well in the state of Georgia, particularly in the Atlanta area. Ohio State has been very active. They swung for the fences in the 23 class, hit a little bit, lost a little bit in that area specifically, and they'll stay there here going forward. It's just a part of that philosophy of, hey, when we're going to go head-to-head with these schools on the field, we got to beat them in recruiting too. And obviously, they just played Georgia, right? They just played Georgia, and a lot of people are looking at if there was any talent disparity between these two programs. I think it did look like just a smidge at the end of the game that there could have been more talent on that Georgia side. So that's something that will always be a priority for whoever the head man is at Ohio State. That's just the part of the game. Your competition is based on the blue bloods in the SEC and the ACC, right? It's Georgia, it's Alabama, it's Clemson. Those are the schools. I throw Texas in there too, future SEC member. Those are the schools that you're consistently competing against. Ohio State knows that. No disrespect to Michigan or Penn State or Michigan State, et cetera, Notre Dame even. Those are the schools Ohio State is measured against on the field and in recruiting. And they know that those are the target areas they have to hit. So they're going to stay in Florida. They're going to stay in Georgia. They're going to stay in that area of the country. So this will be another measuring stick example relative to KJ Bolden when he gets through the process. But look, the Bucs are going to stay in it for a while.
Last thing for you here about KJ Bolden before moving to another recruit, DB, wide receiver, where do you see him playing in college?
That's a great question. I tend to think all things even, you go to the defensive side of the
Yeah.
ball. Your size is more coveted there. There are less bigger players on the defensive side of the ball, particularly if you have any opportunity to play corner. To me, if you're talking about money, right? If you're talking about value, that's
Yeah.
where most of it is. You want to be a Sauce Gardner more so than you want to be, your run-of-the-mill receiver. Although, again, athletically, he can absolutely do it. He's polished already on both sides of the football. So I think it's going to be one of those scenarios where there's no school that's going to be like, hey, we are only viewing you as this, because that's probably going to turn him off. But he does have the athleticism to warrant that. I think he is legitimately a two-way threat to the point where you could even see him start his career at one spot and then make the move to the other side of the ball as his college career develops. And you have to wonder with Dion in particular, is he saying, hey, we played Travis Hunter on both sides of the ball last year, probably going to do it again at Colorado. Do you want to kind of replace him on our roster as that two-way guy? And if that's something that becomes more important to KJ, then he'll consider Colorado a little bit more. But I tend to think all things even, and this feels very even positionally between both spots, I tend to think defense, because you just have more value as a bigger, faster player at that spot relative to receiver, where we do see a little bit more of that on a consistent basis.
From one of the best players in the 2024 recruiting class to the best player in his own state, Donavan Harbour. He is a 6'5", 310-pound, massive human being. I said Samson Okalola was massive, but that was a different frame. Okalola had the body fat kind of chiseled down. This young man, Donavan Harbour, the body fat is visible, and when you see it, when he's coming your way, you're going to get pancaked. 6'5", 310, out of the state of Wisconsin. Recently dropped his top 7. The Buckeyes are there as well. John, what do you like about this young man?
He's a mauler. You said it, Jay. This is a phone booth. Let's get him one-on-one with a player and run behind him kind of guy. True interior projection. He maybe could play right tackle down the line, but this is a kid who's just most comfortable at the contact point. And that's what you want in most of your offensive line recruiting, especially this early, right? He's got room to polish out and get a little bit more technical and trim a little bit as a senior and eventually at the collegiate level. But right now the floor is, this is a mauling interior offensive lineman, and every school needs that. Even if you're the most spread pass happy school, you want to try to establish the run. And obviously these are the type of linemen that you want to run behind in that pursuit. And I think it's reflective of his top schools, right? As you mentioned, Wisconsin kid, there's gonna be a lot of Big Ten influence, but it's stretching beyond that Big Ten footprint as well. This is a truly coveted interior prospect. So it'll be fascinating to see how long he takes in this recruitment. Linemen typically are a little bit faster through the process. So that will be fascinating to watch here with Harbour. Wisconsin's going to stay in it. I would assume Ohio State stays in it. He visited for a couple games last year. So the Bucks will, in that footprint, will have as good a shot as anybody to land Harbour, who, again, he's just a mauler. I like that he has some tackle experience, but he's got a ton of guard experience, which is where I think he's most comfortable at the next level. But again, he's got time to polish out and get a little bit more technical from a pass blocking and retreating standpoint. So fascinating player, high level guy who at a minimum is going to be your strong side guard that you're going to call some run plays behind more times than not at the next level.
You're right. Those run plays right behind him. I was watching some highlights, and there's no fear in these running backs when they see Big Harbour right in front of them, and they know Harbour's guys going to the ground. All they got to do is, do I go right? Do I go left to get past him? He's one of those guys. When I watch him, I said, is he a left guard or a left tackle? And I couldn't really. You say more so interior. He does play a lot of left tackle. I do know Ohio State does like 300-pound guards. Like that's what they utilize. I mean, Donovan Jackson, Matt Jones, those aren't like small guys playing left or right guard. So if guard's a spot, I like to see him work on his footwork. When I know one area I saw was pulling, but pulling is hard. Like when you're that big, pulling is hard. But pulling was the footwork is one thing, but run blocking, like if you want to run the ball, no matter who it is, if it's Hayden, Pryor, let's say Henderson stays for a little bit, get behind Big Harbour. I don't think Henderson will be there long enough to play with Harbour, but I do think, though, the run blocking is there. Do you think, though, that Ohio State could pull them out outside of Wisconsin? Because Wisconsin's known for developing offensive linemen.
Yeah, look, if you're an lineman in Wisconsin under any coaching staff and you're coveted by the Badgers, it's a big deal. I mean, I think that's very clear. You mentioned the history there. I will say, though, it'll be interesting because now under Phil Longo, the new OC there under Luke Fickell, they're going to open it up. They're going to look a lot more like Ohio State offensively, at least in principle, under their new coaching staff. So when you start to think about that versus the classic let's run the football approach, I do think you can maybe open things up a little bit more relative to other schools recruiting him. So now if you're looking at all spread and wide open options, now does Ohio State become more attractive because they're the more established one as opposed to the more traditional? You know, if Iowa was in this race, I'd be like, yeah, that could be a nice, detraction from what Ohio State is selling. And some kids may prefer that. Every old lineman loves run blocking, right? So that would be something under the traditional Wisconsin angle that I think would work a little bit more, but they're going to open things up now under Phil Longo. So obviously a lot of kids in that state are going to be curious to see how the spring goes and how the early 2023 season goes offensively with the Badgers. That's been the problem area there. But I do think that they're still going to be tough to beat. I mean, you're a lineman in that state. It's kind of what they do, right? It's like linemen in Iowa. It's running backs in the South. I mean, there are certain players and certain positions where it's just hard, right? If Lincoln Riley wants you at quarterback, it's going to be hard for some of those other schools to win, right? It just kind of is what it is. So I do think that Wisconsin angle will still be strong for offensive linemen. But again, the caveat is that offense is going to start to look different. How does that affect how these big interior guys in particular view the Badgers versus yesteryear?
John, last thing here with Mr. Harbour, it's not so much about him specifically on the field, but we have seen, even with KJ Bolden, we have seen Oregon and Tennessee be on a lot of these guys. We mentioned Colorado, how we're going to see Colorado and a lot more of these top or highly touted recruits. Some people think, I don't know what's going on out there, but some people think that it's money talking, that they're coming out here using NIL to their advantage, saying, hey, we got this for you, we got that for you. And they're trying to use money to lure recruits to either Knoxville or over there in Oregon, Pacific Northwest. Have you heard anything about this when you're talking to the recruits saying that these schools are doing? I know you're not supposed to be saying this stuff to people like yourself, but people are speculating that they're just trying to buy recruits on the recruiting trail.
Yeah, it's not that simple, right? Every time there's speculation that way, there's more layers to that story. We talked to a bunch of prospects last week at the Under Armour All-America game and practices. And look, NIL's coming up more than it ever has. But there isn't one recruit that admitted that it's the driving force towards a decision. Is it a factor? Yeah. Can it become an increasingly important factor? Absolutely. But I haven't heard it be the deciding factor for a specific recruit. Again, this is based on what they say, not necessarily based on, all of the truths. But there's no doubt that NIL is playing a role here. The perception of schools relative to NIL, I think, is playing very much so in recruiting, right? And again, just imagine some of these scenarios where these high school kids are coming from. I know high school kids that get one power bar a day from their coach, and that's the only meal they have. To that prospect, is NIL going to matter more? Absolutely. And it should. It could change your life and your family's life immediately when you get to your school. But there are other cases where that it's not as important. It's not as big a deal. Most kids, again, at Under Armour Week, so you're talking about All-American level players, most of them said, look, if I do what I have to do in college, money will take care of itself because I'll be in the NFL. So I'm not as worried about NIL on the front end. And then there's another group that says, hey, NIL's around at all these schools. And again, if I'm the guy, if I become the guy, then NIL will come my way. It's not so much, hey, this amount was promised, and if I go here, I'm just going to get that much money. A lot of those kids are approaching it like, if I earn it, it will come. as opposed to it's going to be there the moment I arrive, even if I'm the fourth team, tight end. It's not that simple. So I do think that it's becoming a more consistent conversation, and certainly you can see the teams that are benefiting from it. I mean, Louisville signed a great class based in California through a coaching change. It'd be ignorant to suggest NIL wasn't a part of that maintenance from one coaching staff to the next. But is it a deciding factor? I mean, that stuff still remains to be seen, and there are not a lot of players admitting that it's even high on the priority list, much less the one that puts them over the edge for a certain program.
John, we're up out of time. I'd like to come back later to discuss Charles Lester III, kind of give you a sneak peek into what's going to come next time when John's with us. But John, if you could, let everyone know where they can follow you on Twitter. And there's a lot of All-American games coming up. I'm sure you guys are busy over there at SI. What are some good stuff you guys are doing there as well?
Yeah, we're watching these games closely. We're putting together our final rankings. The SI 99 final ranking will come out in the next week or so. So yeah, check us out, si.com/college, and we'll talk about it a little bit more on Twitter as well. John Garcia _JR.
And guys, you can follow me on Twitter at jstevens07. You can send all of your emails to jstevens317@gmail.com. We're up out of time. We had another recruit. Gotta save it for another day. John will be back. We'll discuss that recruit and whatever else is going on in Buckeye recruiting right here on Locked On Buckeyes with our guy, John Garcia Jr. John, once again, like always, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Jay. Take care.